Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to really cut through the noise on important topics. In today's global economy, it feels like everyone agrees that attracting skilled foreign workers is, well, essential for staying competitive. But here's the thing. Not all foreign labor seems to carry the same strategic weight or maybe the same level of risk. So today we're diving into a pretty specific and I think thought-provoking argument. The case for prioritizing citizens from G7 nations for jobs right here in the U.S.
That's exactly it. And for this deep dive, we're looking at excerpts from an article called Why Non-G7 Citizens Should Not Be Employed in the United States.
Yeah.
It's by Tyreek A Gaynor-Fray, published June 2025 on Medium. And the author's core idea, their main thesis, is pretty straightforward. Gaynor-Fray argues that hiring G7 citizens actually helps boost the U.S. economy, innovation, national security, and even diplomatic ties.
Okay, why G7 specifically?
Well, because of shared political values, existing security partnerships, compatible economic systems, things like that. And conversely, the article suggests that employing people from, say, adversarial or maybe unstable countries, many outside the G7, could bring security risks or policy headaches.
Right, okay, so let's unpack this properly. Our plan for this deep dive is to really get into the specific reasons the author lays out for focusing on G7 citizens. Then we'll contrast that with the risks mentioned for non-G7 employment. And then there's this broader point the author makes at the end we need to look at.
Okay, so first up, the economic value and shared standards argument. The author starts strong here, pointing out that G7 countries, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the UK, and the US are, among the most advanced economies. They generally have high standards for education, solid legal systems, sophisticated industrial rules.
So the idea is their workforce is trained similarly.
Pretty much. The point is, citizens from these places often bring top-tier expertise, think medicine, tech, engineering, finance, academia. And crucially, they're trained in systems that are transparent, standardized, and importantly, compatible with how things work professionally in the U.S.
Right, so it's not just about the skills themselves, but how easily they plug into the system here. Less friction, maybe.
Exactly. What's fascinating here, as Gaynor-Fray argues, is how this alignment cuts down on, well, hidden costs. It's almost like a pre-vetted talent pool. This seamless fit means less time and money spent on onboarding, on compliance issues. They integrate faster, more efficiently.
Makes sense. Did the author give examples?
Yeah, mention things like a Canadian software architect or maybe a German aerospace engineer. The idea is they can hit the ground running, contribute almost immediately without a huge learning curve on norms and standards. And that's framed as a big competitive plus.
Okay, beyond just the economics, the article hits hard on national security and strategic alignment. That feels like a major piece of this.
Oh, absolutely. It's central to the argument. The piece really emphasizes that G7 countries are long-standing allies. There's a deep history there. They share intelligence, through things like Five Eyes. They cooperate militarily via NATO, coordinate policy through the OECD, the UN.
So a built-in level of trust.
Exactly, a foundation of trust. And that's seen as critical, especially if foreign nationals are working in sensitive spots, key industries, research labs, maybe public infrastructure.
And the contrast the author draws.
Yeah.
How does that look for non-G7 nations?
Well, the article contrasts this with citizens coming from, say, authoritarian states or countries that are geopolitically adversarial to the U.S., many of which aren't in the G7. The concern raised is that in some of those systems, the state has a lot of control over private actors. Gaynor-Fray points out that some governments might even require their citizens working abroad to cooperate with intelligence gathering or cyber espionage.
That's a serious point. Is it about individuals being untrustworthy?
The author is careful there. It's clarified that this isn't a judgment on the individuals themselves. It's framed as a systemic risk, a risk stemming from potential state influence or direction. And the article mentions past cases, things like IP theft, academic spying, cybercrime, often linked back to countries that don't have these formal alliances or trust frameworks with the U.S. So it's about state actions, not necessarily individual intent.
Okay, that leads into another angle. Cultural compatibility and democratic values. Sounds a bit softer, but maybe just as important in practice.
It could be, yeah. The argument presented is that G7 citizens generally come from liberal democracies. They share fundamental values around, like, the rule of law, freedom of speech, individual rights, basic stuff in these societies. And the suggestion is this makes them more likely to naturally understand and respect U.S. workplace culture, follow regulations, adhere to ethical norms right from the start.
Because the underlying assumptions are similar.
Right. There's a sort of pre-existing alignment on how things should work ethically and legally.
And when that alignment isn't there, what practical issues does Gaynor-Fray see?
Well, conversely, the article posits that individuals from countries with very different political systems might not share their same basic assumptions. Think about things like transparency, or the idea of whistleblowing if something's wrong, or even just attitudes towards anti-corruption rules. Again, not tarring everyone with the same brush, but the author suggests this could mean, higher costs for training and onboarding, maybe needing more oversight, and potentially just more risk of cultural or legal clashes, especially in jobs where those norms really matter.
Got it. The article also brings up reciprocal opportunities, fairness, so it's not just a one-way street.
Absolutely. That's an interesting angle. The author paints the G7 as a kind of network built on mutual trust and openness, and highlights that Americans working abroad, say in Canada, Japan, or the UK, generally benefit from pretty favorable visa rules. Why? Because our governance norms are seen as aligned.
So prioritizing G7 workers here is seen as upholding our end of that bargain.
That's the argument. It upholds this principle of reciprocal access among trusted partners. It's about maintaining a sort of fair play in how international talent moves between these allied nations.
And the flip side, does the author say other countries aren't as open?
Yes, the piece points out that many non-G7 countries actually have quite strict rules, heavily restricting or monitoring foreign workers, particularly Americans. So from that viewpoint, focusing U.S. opportunities on G7 citizens is seen as not just honoring alliances, but also promoting a kind of balance or fairness in this global exchange.
Okay, one last main point before the big conclusion. Legal safeguards and public trust. How does that fit in? Is this presented as a new idea or building on existing practice?
More building on existing practice. The article notes that U.S. law already restricts foreign nationals in certain government jobs, right? Especially roles needing security clearances. So Gaynor-Fray's argument is essentially that allowing G7 citizens into non-government sectors, or maybe even some government roles with proper oversight, is a much lower security risk compared to opening the doors wider to citizens from regimes considered hostile to U.S. interests.
So it's framed as applying an existing security logic more broadly, but still in a targeted way?
Exactly. It's presented as a consistent application of a principle that's already in place for the most sensitive roles.
Okay, so we've walked through Gaynor-Fray's case for prioritizing G7 citizens' economics, security, culture, reciprocity, legal consistency. It's quite detailed. But then right at the end, the author seems to shift gears, makes a much bigger jump. What's that final argument?
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting and maybe more controversial. Gaynor-Fray's final position actually goes way beyond just prioritizing the G7. The author explicitly states, and this is a direct quote, "I would go further to argue that it should only be U.S. citizens due to the existing size of the population, limited opportunities available, and confusion created when there are other nationalities in the job market."
Wow, okay, so from G7 preference to America first, essentially, in the workforce.
Pretty much. And to back this up, the author even throws in a number. 336 million is enough to fill the workforce and any needs.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a very clear pivot from that nuanced, alliance-focused argument to a much more inward-looking stance based on population size and opportunity limits.
Okay. So just to quickly recap this deep dive, we looked at Gaynor-Fray's detailed case for why prioritizing G7 citizens in U.S. employment could benefit the country economically, for security, culturally, diplomatically. And then we saw that final, much broader argument that maybe the focus should be solely on U.S. citizens for American jobs.
Right. So what does all this mean for you listening to this? How should you think about it? These arguments, as laid out by Gaynor-Fray, definitely make you think about the trade-offs, don't they? How do you balance the potential benefits of bringing in talent from trusted allies against perceived risks from elsewhere, or even against the idea of focusing solely inward? It really touches on core questions about immigration policy, economic strategy, and national security priorities.
Absolutely. And it leaves us with a pretty big question to chew on. If a nation did decide to strictly prioritize employment, based on criteria like these, focusing heavily on its own population, or maybe just a very tight circle of allies, what might be the unintended consequences down the road? What could that mean for its global influence, its ability to innovate, or even just its resilience in a world that seems to be getting more connected and not less? Something to think about.